Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&A. I got to start out by giving a shout out and all of my best wishes to anybody that was caught up in that storm that just hit. I saw some pretty terrifying pictures, so I really hope everybody's okay. I hate to see crazy stuff like that. I always enjoy storms that are like almost scary but not quite, because it seems exciting but no one actually gets hurt, like maybe a bush falls over or something. But it's really terrifying when you see what could actually happen just because nature. So hope everybody's okay, and let's jump into the Q&As. Okay, starting right with Patreon, because I don't believe there's any questions on any other services this week, but as always, wherever it is that you support, just post your question and I'll get to it, unless I make a silly mistake and miss it, so please just re-ask the next week. But Shurzor Steinholm says, regarding the question about projectors last week, I would recommend Optima's gaming projectors with approximately 16 milliseconds of input lag. I'm currently rocking a BenQ W1070, but I'm planning on upgrading to an Optima UHD 30. Thank you for the suggestion. Any projector fans out there, please feel free to chime in. I really know nothing about them other than, how to set them up and use them, but not as far as performance goes and anything like that. But maybe someday I'll have the opportunity to test a bunch and really do a gaming comparison, both for modern and classic gaming. But thank you very much for the suggestion. Mark Main says they're a little confused about the Tink M in regards to the RetroTink line of scalers. Would the best purchases to cover all consoles just be the Tink M and the SCART 2X, as the Tink M would be used for all 3D consoles and 2D composite consoles, and then all other 2D consoles output RGB SCART? Doesn't the Tink M make the Tink Pro pointless unless you have HD Retrovision component cables? Or is there a 2D console that I'm not thinking of that outputs component or S-video? Or am I misunderstanding something? No, honestly, Mark, I think you nailed it. I think, Mike Chi is a friend of mine. I have nothing but respect for him. But I did say when I was first told about this product that be careful because this could confuse more people than it helps, which unfortunately I do think seems to have been the case. You were able to kind of discuss the exact perfect scenarios. The other scenario I think it's really good for is, you're a modern gamer, you have only HDMI consoles, but you also love the PS2 and the Wii, let's just say. Then yeah, this is the scaler for you. But yeah, I mean, you're right in your full analysis of this. It's also really it really relates to what consoles and what cables you already own. So of course, if you already had like a HD Retrovision cables for a Super Nintendo and Genesis, and also a PS2, it might actually be better to just get the Tink Pro, the original Pro, I mean, and then, maybe also get a component video cables for the PS2 whenever you need to go 480p, or just don't go 480p from the PS2. There's a ton of different combinations of things that would work, but the only thing I slightly disagree with is the wording. So in context of your question, in the context of exactly what you said, does the Tink M make the Pro pointless? Yes, in that context. But it doesn't make the Pro pointless out of context, because it's still the perfect device for somebody that wants scan lines, the low-res feature, and who uses mostly 2D games. So hopefully I didn't confuse anything even more, but I think you completely nailed it, and I just think there's many different ways to explain why you would want the Tink M, but with every explanation of why you would want it, also comes a long list of why that might not be the best choice for you. So hopefully the people that need that will pick it up, and hopefully everybody else will either just stick to the originals, which is totally fine, or get the info they need. But man, I'm always trying to think of different ways to explain it, to try to put it into better perspective. But yeah, it is a bit confusing with the different types of products now. Charles Madir had a question. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. Sorry. And it's a long question, but it's an easy summary. So I figured I would just sum it up for everybody. They have a setup that takes all of their audio from their game consoles and their computer and runs it through a mixer, and then uses headphones so that they could stream and record and hear all their different sounds that they need to while they're playing. And Charles seems to be getting some ground buzz on it, but it's only really from the Super NT and the FX Pack when they're not using the FX Pack Pro. So I think what's happening is, and I read through your question twice to make sure I'm getting this right, but I think what could be happening, if you're only getting audio buzz when playing the Super NT, turn off cartridge audio in the advanced settings when you're using original cartridges and turn it back on when you're using the FX Pack Pro or the Super Game Boy. And I don't even know if you would need it on with the FX Pack Pro unless you're using MSU1 audio games, but that is a known issue in when it passes through audio from the console or from the cartridge. If it's not something that generates its own audio, then you will get some hum. So I think that's all it is, I hope. But if you're starting to get hum and buzz on other consoles or in other setups, then you really start to need to look at like audio grounding issues and stuff like that, which starts to get really complicated. So I would do something like, try to eliminate as many pieces of the puzzle first. So see if you could plug, let's just say your PlayStation 4, I'm just randomly picking something, into your audio device along with your headphones, and then see if you get any hum. And then if you don't, add the computer, and if you don't, add the matrix switch, and if you don't, and then keep adding it back until you hear it. And if you hear it directly, on the first time, it's the first piece of equipment you use. So that's actually, or your headphones. But I think your question is you're getting buzz when you're using the Super NT when you're not using the FX Pack Pro. And if that's the case, try just turning off cartridge audio pass-through and see if that helps. And please let me know, because I'm kind of curious about this one. Lowpro says they're running a similar capture setup to mine with a G-SCART switch with 2 outputs, a DataPath Vision E1, and one of those SCART cleaners, formerly called the SCART 2 DVI, but I changed the name because it was confusing people. And they have a sync stripper and low-pass filter turned on, but they're having really quiet audio. So the issue is was my mistake, and luckily it's an easy one to fix. On these SCART cleaner things, I have all my adapters on it, excuse this. On these SCART cleaner things, right above where you see the audio, there's 2 resistors in the middle. And those were originally put there because we were wondering what the audio surge might be like when you're powering on your console, and what the voltage levels would be and how that would affect your capture card or your computer. So the initial suggestion was to put resistors on there to make sure that there wasn't any surge in voltage spike that could hurt anything. But in all of our testing, we found that that was actually not necessary. So I believe if you just remove those 2 resistors on top of the audio port, it'll just raise the volume back up to normal level. And as long as you're using something like a PC audio card, like the Zonar that you said you're using, then you should never have an issue ever, period. And in fact, there's like a 99.9% chance that any other thing that's expecting an audio jack that you plug into would be fine too. We just wanted to start out erring on the side of caution, just in case, because I'd always rather have this scenario. I would rather have a message from you saying, hey, the audio is too quiet, than a message from you saying, hey, my sound card doesn't work anymore. So I'm sure you could understand. I'll try to double check the exact procedure of what to do and then post directly to your response here. But I'm pretty sure you could just either remove those 2 resistors, and that's all you need to do, because I think they're just resistors to ground to lower the audio. And let me just double check the resistor number again. I think you just remove R13 and R12. I think you might need to replace them with 0 ohm resistors or just jump them, but I'll double check and follow up on the question before this all goes live. But I think that's all you'll need to do, and hopefully it's not too hard. All you would really need is tweezers and a soldering iron, and you should be able to take care of that. Kieran O'Donnell had a question that I'm not 100% sure of what the question is. I think I might be getting confused on something, so I'm going to try to answer it to my best ability and then maybe, follow up and see if I got it right. But it looks like they have a bunch of RGB consoles plugged into a Pro monitor. And I think what you mean by Pro monitor is like a PVM or something like that. But let's assume that and move on for now. They're using RGB, and then the output of sync, so for sync on composite video for all of these consoles, is going into an AV receiver. And they also have a Laserdisc player going into the same AV receiver. And then that receiver is going into a cheap composite to HDMI converter, which is then going to an ultra-wide monitor. And the problem with this is that Laserdiscs are now displayed with letterboxing and pillar boxing, and the screen could only stretch horizontally and vertically. So they're wondering if there's any composite or S-video converter that also has dynamic zooming capabilities. So here, there's a few different answers to this. They also provided a link of exactly what this looks like, so I'll see if I can get it up on screen here. So Yeah, so it's not only cut off left to right, but it's cut off top to bottom as well. So there's a few scenarios in which we're talking about here. If I got it right, and if you're actually gaming on an RGB monitor, but you're also running everything through your receiver for your Laserdisc player and just to have something on a second monitor, then if that's the case, then lag wouldn't matter. And there's a bunch of devices. I think there's even possibly some Extron devices out there. Definitely some DVDO that could zoom all of these different inputs any way that you would like to. Some of those are going to be a bit of an investment. I'm not sure how important that is to you. If lag isn't, or if lag is an issue, so if you're actually needing to game on this, the RetroTink 2XM would actually be perfect for both Laserdisc and for just composite video sources like we discussed before. So that should kind of sum everything up for you. The only thing I'm wondering, when you say you have all the consoles plugged into a Pro monitor, do you mean that your ultra-wide monitor is the Pro monitor and you have two different sources? If I'm just confusing that part and I don't have that right, just ignore this. Everything else I said should be okay. But it just, in the way I'm reading your question, it does seem like you have an RGB monitor setup, and then you're also just getting composite video out to go into the secondary setup for whatever reasons. So in that case, just I would try anything except the composite to HDMI converter that you're currently using, because those cheap ones are usually pretty terrible. You probably spent like $20 on it. It probably did a good enough job for what it is. So I would just first start with a different composite to HDMI converter, and then kind of go from there, unless you already have access to something like one of those other devices. But yeah, in fact, what you just showed, although completely unrelated, was a similar problem that I just had. And that one monitor that I had that I was using to test the PS1 digital wouldn't put anything into 4:3 mode. So I had to use the PS1 digital's 1080p mode, which centered everything perfectly, but the 960p mode, while it looked great, was stretched too wide, and I didn't have the option to stretch it back. And I think it's just a result of a lot of computer monitors don't offer features that you would normally find in consumer-grade TVs. So I think I got everything right, but if it needs any clarification, let me know. And thanks very much for the kind words. I really appreciate it. Robert Dickinson had a question about power supply replacement. And once again, I mean this respectfully, but I'm not going to comment on any power supply that I haven't tested. The one that you're talking about is coming from Game Tech. I mean, I've known Jason a long time. I generally trust his recommendations on things, but no disrespect to him, to you, to anybody else, I do not feel comfortable giving recommendations on power related stuff that I haven't had direct contact with and been able to test myself. You know, saying things like, hey, grab this new HDMI scaler, I think it's going to be great, I haven't tested it yet. Yeah, I'll recommend that all day long, because the worst thing that could happen is it's not as good as we hoped. But anything power related, the worst thing that could happen is it starts to kill your console. So I don't feel comfortable doing that. I'm really sorry. You know, I know it seems like a cop out, but I just would rather say, I don't know, let's hopefully find people that have done proper testing on it. You know, testing under load on a scope, or I guess even just under load on a multimeter is more than a lot of these places do. So but it's just, there's too much involved for me to give a confident recommendation on something like that. Rick's got 3 questions this week. I'll try to answer them all in one shot, but if not, I might need to do a jump cut or something. I hate doing those, but let's take a deep breath and see if I could do it. First, their entire setup goes into one TV through one HDMI. They'd like to split it into 2 or preferably 3 other TVs. Can you recommend an HDMI splitter that could do that without additional lag? If so, the third TV I'd like to go to is a CRT with only composite. Is there a cheap HDMI to composite I could suggest without additional lag if possible? So you would need to look for splitters. You could probably use 2 splitters, and I've never tried that before. I'm not sure how well that would work. Or I think I have, actually, because I think one was a splitter and then the other one I also needed to get audio from as well, and they were on different ends of the room. But you could try to do that. That might actually be the cheapest. You could try to look for HDMI matrix switchers with multiple outputs. That would be easier, but most likely going to be way more expensive. And as far as I know, at the moment, right now, there is no zero lag HDMI to composite video converter. I know there's a few people that were hoping to look into something like that, but I don't know of anything out there now. So you might, as long as you don't really need to game on it, maybe you're doing it just for like a presentation type of thing, then I would just grab whatever's out there. But also understand that anything that's out there that isn't very specifically for gaming is probably going to take whatever HDMI signal and convert it to 480i, not 240p, so it won't look right. Next question, unrelated. Based on your weekly roundup video about power supplies, when I bought a Famicom years ago, I read that a Genesis 1 power supply works for it. I bought a really cheap knockoff and it has worked for years. What risks am I running with not having a good power supply? Slowly killing your console. Throw it in the garbage. You know, I know money's tight, right? I don't ever try to be frivolous with my money, but you're probably talking about a $10 power supply and a quality replacement from Castlemania's $15. So, and you said you've had it for years, so that either means it's fine or you're slowly killing your console. For $10 or $15, my personal opinion, toss that in the garbage and get one that's definitely been verified. Unless for whatever reason the power supply that you bought absolutely, definitely has been verified, but you say it's a cheap knockoff, so toss it in the garbage. And third, because I want to support you, if an ad pops up when I'm watching your videos on YouTube, does it help you more if I let the whole thing play versus hitting skip? That is a really nice question to ask. Skip that shit. Skip it. I make zero money off of YouTube, like nothing, to the point where if YouTube didn't get exposure for the website, I would just delete the channel and only have like a separate Q&A weekly roundup channel. Like I would never actually do any of these insanely time-consuming videos if it was for YouTube revenue. So very nice and very thoughtful question to ask, but honestly, just skip it. And if I ever have the ability to turn off YouTube ads, because you know, every drop in the bucket, right? You know, if I get a penny for every video, like I leave it on there. But if I ever have the ability to turn off ads so that no one has to see any ad at all, I would do that. The way YouTube works, you can't really, but I would actually like to do something like an in-video 15-second ad of a product that I actually believe in and something that I think is relevant to viewers, rather than have these stupid YouTube ads pop up. But you can't do that. Even if I turn ads off, all that means is that I turn off ad revenue and they could still stick ads in front of it or in the middle of it if YouTube should choose to. Their rules are contradictory. They change all the time, sometimes with telling people, and sometimes they change them and then months later go, oh, that was a bug, you know, but we're not going to fix it. It's maddening. But thank you for the very thoughtful question. But no, just you know, watch as easy as possible. And if I ever find the ability to skip all ads, I absolutely will. The GOAT says input number 1 on their Extron Crosspoint just stopped working. RGB still passes signal through, but sync does not. All other inputs and outputs seem to work. The only thing they've ever had hooked up is a G-SCART switch, so all input signals should have been in a safe range. Any ideas for what caused this? It's rare that I've seen crosspoints break. They're usually built like tanks, but physical wear and tear. So even if you got yours and kept it mint, you know, who knows that maybe when it was shipped to you, it went down a flight of stairs in the box, and maybe just slowly over time one of the connectors broke. Maybe it's a capacitor. Maybe the capacitor dried out on the sync line. If you've ever tinkered with electronics before, I would unplug it, of course, and then open it up and see if you could see some very easy physical damage. If not, you know, kind of shine a flashlight in there, like maybe take the top or sides off and see if you could see any of the capacitors leaking. Very often it leaks underneath the cap, so you can't even see it depending on what type of caps they are. But I just, you know, this equipment's starting to get really old, and most of these crosspoints came out of very heavy duty work environments. So, you know, it's just about time, I guess, for some of these stuff to start to break. But maybe try that and see where you go from there. And hopefully it's one of the crosspoints with a million inputs. So just not having one, or having one that doesn't work, won't be a big deal. Or I guess just use that for a component video, because you wouldn't need sync for that. Michael Caramonte is looking to hook a 32X to the analog DAC. And they looked at a bunch of different cables and scenarios, but in all honesty, I believe Retro Access just sells this cable. So you could try to piece something together yourself, But if I were you, I would just get the cable from Retro Access. That's 9-pin mini DIN out of the 32X into the VGA input of the DAC, and then out the console. I think that's by far the easiest thing, and they're fairly priced. I mean, nothing they sell is cheap, but they're all high-quality, hand-built stuff, so you get what you pay for. You could try to cut up and make your own, but you'd have to find a 9-pin connector, and then you'd have to solder it into a VGA connector. And if that's what you're looking to do, let me know and I could try to walk you through what you would need. But I would honestly just pick up the adapter from Retro Access and go from there, because it's just going to be plug and play at that point. And I'm sure you already have it, but I would also get the plastic spacer from Laser Bear so that the 32X slides perfectly into the Mega SG, so that you don't have the 32X flopping around and cutting off and losing signal or anything. A couple of questions from Diego. First, they would love to use the mode on both the Saturn and the Dreamcast, but it's expensive. Is there a way of plugging both consoles at the same mode so they don't have to pay for it twice? The only way that you could do something like this is if you left the tops off of both of your consoles, maybe grabbed an SSD and dropped all of your games on it, so one folder Dreamcast, one folder Saturn, and then whenever you're done using it, unplug it from the back, unplug the mode, plug it into the different one, and then, replug it into the back. That would be the only way that I would know how to do that. There's no way to split it. There's no way to run a cable to both of it. I mean, both of those that's a perfectly plausible way of doing it. Maybe, just to elaborate a little bit, maybe you could do something like have the consoles next to each other, plug the power into a power strip, and then, always have it off unless you're using it, and then just take the screws out of the case, but save them in a baggie somewhere, so that whenever you need to use the mode, you take the top off of your Dreamcast, you turn the power strip off, take the top off your Dreamcast, pull out the mode, put the top back on your Dreamcast, pull the top off your Saturn, plug it in, plug the wires in, plug this, put the top back on, and then flip the switch on the power strip. That would totally work. It would still kind of look normal. It would just really add the extra step of switching them back and forth. The only issue with that is the connectors on the CD drive and the ribbon connectors aren't designed to be plugged and unplugged a million times in a row, especially the ribbon connectors. Those are really designed to just plug in once and then not at all. So I would definitely get another ribbon connector for the Saturn. Those are cheap. You could get those on DigiKey. And I would just be conscious of how many times you go back and forth. This is a perfectly good solution if your plan is to say, I'm going to get the mode now, and then I'm going to get another Saturn solution at some point in the future. So I'll swap back and forth, and then eventually just leave it in my Dreamcast and get a different Saturn solution, or vice versa. So yeah, I mean, that would totally work. I would just keep all that stuff in mind. Also, they'd like to ask about Genesis. They have a PAL Mega Drive with a 50-60 Hz mod connected to a PAL Mega CD using the Retro Gaming Cable's RGB SCART cable, which is then going into a G-SCART switch and then the OSSC. They love it, but the thing is, some games tend to be glitchy. For instance, in Shinobi 3, some sprites suddenly disappear, where in Sonic 2, the game freezes after some minutes of play. Is there any known issue? Maybe the ROMs they're using are somehow corrupt, or is there perhaps an electrical issue? So I've never encountered that. If you have a switch installed, that could always be part of the issue, forcing maybe PAL games to run at NTSC frequencies or vice versa. That's always a possibility. If you have the ability to pick up original games, Sonic 2 is still a fairly cheap game too. I would try to get an original cartridge just to kind of remove that from the equation. Also, try downloading a ROM from a different place altogether. And if you want to get deep, you could download a bunch of ROMs and verify checksums and see if the ROMs verify good or bad. But in that scenario, I would just start removing one piece of the puzzle at a time until you could figure out what's the actual cause of the issue. And of course, if you have the ability to borrow another Mega Drive from anybody, that would also be a great way to test. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have as easy of an answer to the second one, because you're just going to have to remove one piece of the puzzle until you figure out what the issue is. Jason Guffey was following up from the question last week about running component video through a composite video switch and then just using left and right to pass through. And as I suspected, the switch that they tested didn't work like that. The question this week is on cable management. With so many converters and switchers and splitters in a setup, how the hell do I go about organizing it all? I feel like there's wiring everywhere. Do you have any tips from your experience? I know you do a lot of testing setups, but any advice for something more long-term? Not a complicated question, but still something I need to work on. I bought some cable clips and Velcro ties for now, but I'm not sure where or how to go about using them. So a couple of answers to that. I did have for a while, for the first couple of years of RetroRGB, like one of those tall IKEA shelves that I cut up and had consoles on every shelf and had them all tied up. And the one thing that I learned was that if you need to access those consoles, that's the wrong way to do it. Like, you either need to have two sets of everything, two sets of power supplies, two sets of RGB or component cables and everything else, or you need to run things a different way. So if you have a stationary setup, I would use these cable ties to make sure that there's no tension on the inputs of the consoles, and as well as wherever they're plugging into. If you have something like a G-SCART switch or something, it's kind of easy with the SCART cables just to make sure they're all kind of held in place. I mean, I don't even really need cable management on that side, but I would just have more strain relief and then run cables alongside each other and as best you can, just to kind of minimize the extra wires going around. But if you need to access these consoles at any point, you need to think of the opposite. How easy is it going to be to pull this cable out if I need to bring this console to a different room? So I guess I would just, even in that scenario, you could still worry about slack. And that was something that stuffing all the slack behind that big shelf was definitely an issue. So wherever is going to be the most out of sight, you could kind of very carefully, no crimped edges, just carefully roll up one of the sides, put one of your Velcro ties around it, and wherever is the best out of sight place to keep it. That way you just don't have an extra 3 feet of cable on one and, almost short enough or too short on the other. Everything just kind of sits in the right way. And that way, if you do need to pull or add a cable, you're not trying to feed it through a whole bunch of extra slack on a cable. So I don't know if that's the best advice, but that's certainly where I'm at with all the stuff that I do. Also, glad to see that you enjoyed the Retro Roundtable and the guitar shredding stuff. I really do. Just every time I sit down to work on a personal channel, I realize that I have 2 months of backlog for RetroRGB, and I feel guilty, so I just don't do it. But I do hope to get, a placeholder website, not like RetroRGB, just like a placeholder and like a YouTube channel and everything where I could just flick a camera on and do some fun stuff that maybe RetroRGB fans wouldn't care about or isn't directly relevant, like I do guitar stuff. And I was testing something the other day where I used my old iPhone SE as a wireless webcam, and I couldn't quite get it working right, but I'd love to do a silly video on that just for the hell of it. So I do plan on getting all that stuff out. I need more time, and I need to find an easier way to make these websites because I'm so used to diving into more complicated stuff. I actually think it might be better to do something on Squarespace, but I'm always up for suggestions if anybody has any good ideas. Steadicam Scott wants to know if I have any recommendations on controller extension cables for certain consoles. They see a lot of cheap options on Amazon, but didn't know if there were any to avoid or any to seek out, or if there's anyone from the gaming community that's making these. I've been curious about them, especially to give slack from the controller port on the console to where the chair is. Yeah, console5.com. That is my go-to for everything weird like that. If they have it, it's either going to be good or the only choice, and they're all fair priced. So I would check that first. And then if not, I don't really know of good brands of stuff like that. Like I couldn't find a Neo Geo a Saturn extension cable. So I picked up a cheap one from eBay, and every time I use it, I have to plug it in and then wiggle it out. So it's just a millimeter unplugged. Otherwise it won't work. So, I would start with Console 5, and then if they don't have it, I would just grab anything and just understand that it's probably not going to be the best, and you're going to have to find some weird solution. And also, if you do need to wiggle it like that, that blue painter's tape, the type of tape that like doesn't leave a residue, for one long gaming session, I wrapped a bunch of tape around it to keep it in place so it didn't pop out or anything. And then when I was done, I just unwrapped it and there was no stickiness on it at all. So, but I think, you know, blue painter's tape, even back to Jason's question from earlier, I think that's another good thing to have in your arsenal. Just keep a cheap thing of blue painter's tape for cable management, for stuff like this, for labeling consoles. There was a couple of times where I was like, I just needed to make sure this is a VA1 unmodded, this is a VA3 with a triple bypass. So I just wrote it on the tape, stuck it to the bottom of the Genesis, and when I was done, when I pulled it off, there's no sticky goo. You don't have to sit there with Goo Gone or Fabuloso or any of that awesome stuff to pull that stuff off. So yeah, blue tape if you need to secure a connection with the extensions. Focus wanted to know if I had a recommendation for a good S-Video cable for the Nintendo multi-out. Retro Access makes some absolutely killer ones. Once again, you know, no disrespect, they're expensive, but you get what you pay for. I have links on the site to ones on eBay, but I had to take one of them down because there was one seller that was making awesome cables for a while, and then the quality kind of dropped. So I don't know what was up with that, or maybe it was a couple of people just got a bum cable and, you know, they're actually fine. I don't know. But, and then another eBay seller, I think, has been out of stock for a while. So if you're looking for like, you know, the best S-Video cable you could possibly get with 75 ohm coax and shielded audio, go to the Retro Access. If you're just looking for an inexpensive one, I'm pretty sure, I'm not outing any secrets here, but I'm pretty sure Mike G had already said that he was going to be bundling a decent quality S-Video cable with the RetroTink 2X Mini. So I don't know if he's also going to be selling those cables separately, or if another company is going to be able to do that. So if you need it short term, or if you're looking for really high quality, just get the Retro Access one. If you're not in a rush and you don't need the best, you just need not crappy, then just maybe wait a few weeks and see if that cable is released separately along with the Mini. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks so much to everybody that supports. You're really keeping all of this stuff alive, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you next week.